everyone. Welcome to our panel on diversity in the arts. We have four incredible speakers here this evening. So from left to right, we have Toby Oradane, Sailesh Ram, Fope Jagade, and Saskia Ross. Just to give you some information about them. So Toby is a journalist, entrepreneur, and international public speaker from London. In 2014, she launched the online publication Black Ballad. The subscription media company has the simple mission to help Black women in Britain live their best lives through its content, events, and partnerships with Black-owned brands. Outside of Black Ballad, Toby has become a prominent voice in mainstream women's lifestyle media by writing about race, feminism, beauty politics, and popular culture. She has written for British Glamour, BuzzFeed, The Independent, and more. She was also a part of BBC's 2016 Black and British season, appeared as a panelist in BBC One Extra's Big Debate, and has spoken at TEDx Tottenham 2017. In 2018, she was placed on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list. Sailesh Ram is the founder and editor of www.asianculturevulture.com, an online arts and culture magazine which primarily serves the UK Asian community. He has been an editor for more than a decade, and prior to ACV was the editor of Eastern Eye newspaper. He started his career on local newspapers and has had work published in The Independent and Observer. He also writes creatively and has had work published in The Independent, and his debut novel, Asian Triangle, was shortlisted for a literary prize in Scotland some years ago. Then on my right side, we have Fope, who is a third year studying English literature at Cambridge at Homerton. She's an award-winning poet, and she's writing her dissertation on alternative routes to knowledge and subversive classroom spaces. And then we have Saskia, who is the founder of the Cambridge BME Theatre Group, director of the first BME Shakespeare production in Cambridge, director of Fences, facilitator of the BME Footlight Smoker, and musical theatre bar night, and is also an actor. So just in terms of the format of this discussion, Toby and Sailesh will first deliver short speeches while they talk about their background and challenges that people from ethnic backgrounds face in the arts. Then Fope and Saskia will talk to us about Cambridge and how diversity in the arts has influenced their time here. Then all the panelists will answer some questions, and then I'll open the discussion to you. So if you have any questions, hold on to them, because you'll have an opportunity to ask them your questions at the end. So with that said, I'd like to hand over to Toby. Okay.
Good evening. First of all, I'd like to thank Maya and the entire Cambridge Union team for organising such an important event. So a little bit about me, beginning with the obvious. I'm a Black woman who's now in her 20s. From my accent, you may have, or maybe you haven't guessed, that I'm from East London. I'm the daughter of a housekeeper and a decorator, so therefore I grew up in a working class household. To some, the idea of being a journalist and editor of a glossy magazine that is aimed at women who buy handbags that cost more than my first car, or our monthly household bills combined, was an ambition too far-fetched. And if you look at these two pictures, it's not hard to see why so many thought a Black girl from East London, from a working class home, would find it difficult, if not impossible, to break into the world of journalism. For some of you in the audience, these pictures and my words so far may not convince you as to why journalism can feel unattainable to someone like me. So let's look at the numbers. In 2016, a study by City University found that the journalism industry was 55% male and 94% white, while Black journalists make up 0.2% of the industry, but we make up 3% of the population. And in 2012, the Milborn report found that 51% of the country's top 100 journalists went to private school. There's something that my dad always told me when I was growing up: the numbers do not lie. Yes, these statistics are from 2012 and from 2016, but even up until today, it is an open secret that journalism is preserved for the privileged. It is an exclusive club, and the truth is that the industry of media has to be diverse from its intern to senior level staff. to adequately reflect the diverse nature of our ever-growing multicultural society. Journalism, and more broadly, the media industry, establishes our norms, our values, and defines our standards of acceptability. So the question I have for you all is, why should these norms, these values, these standards of acceptability continually be created by white middle-class men? The only answer I have to that is that journalism acts as an institutional device to maintain the status quo and the social inequality that benefits a specific person based on race, class, and gender. In a world where we continually look at facets of each other's identities and choose to view them as points of contention rather than looking at our different identities in a positive light, journalism more than ever needs to have different voices from different backgrounds to ensure that we reflect our society and its diversity in religion, sexuality, ability, race, class, and gender. It is clear that we still have a long way to go, but the rise in independent publications gives me hope that we are heading towards a diverse media landscape. Publications such as Geldem, Burnt Roti, and of course, Black Ballad, the publication I founded alongside my black male co-founder, all work tirelessly towards elevating the voices of marginalized groups in an authentic manner. Many in the journalism industry view technology and the internet as a hindrance to professional journalism because it affects advertising revenue and because it gives the independent blogger as much power as an established media outlet in topics, arguments, and debates that would take place within our society. As a journalist, as a black female working class journalist, technology has lowered the barriers for me not just to re-enter the journalism world, but to create a platform unfiltered by whiteness and patriarchy. The truth is, the internet, technology, has given rise to diversity when the industry itself refused to do so meaningfully. I mostly write for women's publications, and for so long, these publications have shone a light on a particular voice of womanhood through their words and visuals. For many, women's publications are an entry point of feminism, whether some of us like it or not. Magazines and many online websites have told women that feminism is an exclusive club, and this time for white women. However, with Black Ballad and other publications putting women of other races first, not only have we helped diversify female voices in media, the internet and technology has allowed journalists that look like me to have our voices heard and level the feminist playing field. I will be the first to admit that diversity within the media is an argument that probably many of us are tired of. However, if we are to ensure that the media continues to head in the right direction in terms of becoming more diverse, we must highlight and critique the industry. One of the hindrances to diversity in the journalism and creative industries as a whole is interning. How can young people from working class backgrounds be expected to work for free or for expenses? Only those with financial security from Bank of Mum and Dad can spend months working for free. Statistics from poverty.org.uk states that 2/5 of people from ethnic minorities now live in low-income households, twice the rate of white people. Now, it's no little wonder that the editor of the Evening Standard is George Osborne, or the Evening Standard lacked people of colour in that particular photo. I should say that picture of the Evening Standard that I showed was from March 2017, so we can only hope the offices have become more diverse. I want to end my speech by referencing someone else, and that person is Viola Davis. When she became the first African-American woman to win the Emmy for Best Actress in a Drama Series in 2015, she said this in her speech: "The only thing that separates women of colour from anyone else is opportunity. You cannot win an Emmy for roles that are simply not there." Her words perfectly apply to the journalism industry and the creative industry as a whole. Opportunity is the biggest difference between people of colour and those from working class backgrounds being able to fulfil their passions as journalists. If we don't start to get rid of free internships, if we don't start giving people of colour jobs in senior positions, then we will keep having discussions like this, diversity quotas which don't actually work, and we will keep having offices that don't reflect modern day society. Thank you.
Thanks, Toby. Sailesh?
Hi everyone. I just want to say what an honour it is to come here and speak to you. And thank you, Maya, for inviting me. My name is Silas Ram, and I'm the founder and editor of www.asianculturevulture.com, a South Asian arts and culture online digital magazine. I want to tell you a bit about my journey. I've been a journalist for a long time. Probably I was writing stories when some of you weren't even born. About 6 years ago, while I was the editor of an Asian newspaper some of you may have heard of called Eastern Eye, I began to think about a new kind of publication. I've always enjoyed magazines, and the very first publication I wrote for professionally remains one of the great working experiences of my life. But that was a long time ago now. Nevertheless, I was inspired by it, and I'm also a big believer in the online space, and I felt there was an opening for me and a new sort of publication. One of the things that I've long lived with is the fact that I could never really get enough of a subject I was intensely interested in, and that was British Asian life, the British Asian community, and especially the art being produced and artists. Often I've been a jobbing journalist in the daytime, but in the evenings and weekends my imagination would take off, and I'd often find myself in some both desirable and undesirable situations. I'm not talking about my social life. No, I was an aspiring novelist, and I had a huge appetite for art and artists. Not just the white European ones, who we had on a curriculum anyway. I was very interested in British Asian, black, or any ethnic minority artists. People I could actually relate to, though I accept great art sometimes takes you well out of those kind of considerations. I wanted to be able to identify with these artists and see them not as too ridiculous or far removed from my own hopes and ambitions at that time. Just as this was a personal interest, I soon realized there was a lot more. There were others, like me, interested in their cultural and artistic heritage and keen to explore it, but in a British Asian context. There have also been wider constituencies of interest. ACV has a significant white minority readership. We are an easily accessible and welcoming window to South Asian art and culture. When I first started out as a journalist, it was hard finding stuff out about black writers, artists and theatre makers. And when they did pull up in the mainstream, I was always left wanting more. The larger problem was we as a community were marginalised to some degree. We were always the other, sometimes purely because of our ethnicity and the way we looked and our culture. It didn't matter what we were saying. Now you can take the benign view that this was never intentional on the part of the mainstream or mass media. A sort of unconscious bias had just developed. More cynically, it could look like we were being confined to the margins and being kept there. We were not news unless it was something negative or controversial, but usually only in a racial context. Almost all the Asian media in Britain is a kind of response to that. There was simply a lack of stories, especially positive ones, in the cultural context. There was an ominous corollary to all this while I was training to be a journalist and working in the local papers and progressing my career, that there were not enough black and Asian journalists coming through at any level. In the British Asian context, at a very public level, we were virtually invisible until Sanjay and Geeta popped up in EastEnders. That's a joke. We were almost seen as a problem and always written about in terms of immigration, race relations, or even benefits sometimes in some of the more right-wing papers. At one level, we were really invisible. If you saw the BAFTAs recently, you would think there were no Asian people in Britain at all. And what art was being produced by the Asian community was local, underreported, and often ignored, and assumed to be irrelevant to a mainstream or mass audience. Of course, we have come a long way since then, and I strongly believe social media can still be a force for good, an opportunity to connect, to spread love and hope, and make us understand that we all have more in common with each other than what keeps us apart. As a journalist returning to the Asian press in the early 2000s, it quickly became apparent that our heroes, whether they be artistic or otherwise, were underreported and often ignored. Fast forward now to Asian Culture Vulture. Part of my mission is to highlight artists and their work and show that there are lively and meaningful discussions and debates within the Asian community and not just about the Asian community. We are not a site that focuses simply on British Asians or just people of South Asian heritage. We have people of all ethnicities, so long as there is a South Asian angle to their work and output. In some ways, we are a showcase and a platform, and even a launchpad for the next generation of artists who will make it big and smash through the mainstream. But what am I saying? We are the mainstream. Others just have not caught up. Okay, that's slightly tongue-in-cheek. Since starting AsianCultureVulture.com, I've watched both Riz Ahmed and Dev Patel become figures of international renown and winning Emmys and BAFTAs. Last week was International Women's Day, and we ran an article on 3 women we all admire by 3 ACV writers. My colleague Suman Butcher cited Gayleen Gould, a black woman who has been active on the arts and culture scene for some years in Britain. She has written about cultural neglect, where often non-white artists get little to no media coverage and feel left out of the mainstream conversation. Asian Culture Vulture exists to fill that void, to shout about art and artists from a British Asian perspective, and have a wider perspective that enables more links and connections with our rich cultural heritage, both on the subcontinent and beyond. I know young people read our articles and interviews. 90% of our content is original interviews, and want to understand and see how others have made a journey they too might like to take. I want young people to be inspired by other people's journeys. When there is a lack of visible role models, we all need to be reminded that there are people writing books, getting them published, making films, mounting exhibitions, broadcasting, dancing and singing, and doing it often not with a lot of money, but a huge amount of passion and no little talent. They deserve to be heard and supported. And with your help and interest, that day will come when we are the mainstream. Thank you.
Thank you, Sailesh. So, Phope, if I can move to you. What is deemed as the literary canon is predominantly white and male. What effect do you think this has?
Yeah, I think the key issue with that is just the problem of universality. So when the canon is so narrow and Eurocentric, that's kind of put as the standard, and everything else is kind of compared to that. And I think that's just really unhelpful, particularly when you're engaging in dialogue and discourse. The idea is that, you know, we're global citizens and we want to be recognizing different perspectives. But when the canon is so narrow, we assume that that is the best and that's the standard. And it limits our own understanding of what literature is. Literature is so rich, and when the canon is so narrow, it kind of, it limits that, and it limits our learning and our understanding.
Yeah. And so in terms of Cambridge, could you tell us a bit about diversity or the lack of it in the curriculum, especially with reference to the canon, which you just talked about, and what impact this lack of diversity has on you as an English literature student, and what you think could be done to address this problem?
Yeah, I think I really struggled with the English literature course, particularly the first 2 years, because it is very Eurocentric. And so you don't really get the opportunity to do post-colonial literature until 3rd year, and it's an optional paper. So already, just in the structure of it, it's kind of pushed to the side. And although there are opportunities to bring in kind of global writers in the first 2 years, there is kind of this unspoken hierarchy. And because it's not often spoken about, there is a lack of confidence in saying, okay, these stories matter, they're valuable, they're worthy of discussing in my essay. So I didn't really gain that confidence until 3rd year when I was discovering it, and realizing how much amazing contribution these writers bring to literature. And so that really affected my studies. And I think also, because I love writing as well, creative writing is something I do, I think it's so detrimental in terms of subconsciously you kind of just erase your own narratives. I remember when I was 12 and I was writing my first story, and then it dawned on me that my protagonist was white. And I was just like, okay, why is that the default? Like, I'm a black woman, a character I'm creating is automatically white. So a lot of the times the effects can be really subconscious as well.
Yeah. And do you think that change has been made over the past 3 years while you've been at Cambridge?
Yeah, so the decolonization movement within the English faculty that happened over the last year or so, beginning in Michaelmas last year. I think it's definitely helped to bring up an issue that has been kind of shoved under the rug a lot. I mean, it's not changed everything drastically overnight, but it's kind of forced dialogue to happen. But what really struck me, the backlash that it received in the media, just shows just how much the conversation needs to be had in the first place. The fact that people see inclusion of marginal writers as a threat as opposed to a strength is something that is a bit concerning.
And Saskia, so you have been instrumental in really creating space for BME students in theatre. What do you think are the problems that students from ethnic backgrounds face in theatre in Cambridge, and what do you think can be done about it?
I think the primary problem that we have in Cambridge Theatre is a massive lack of visibility, which makes it difficult to encourage people to get started, because if you don't see yourself represented, you're so much less likely to feel comfortable in these spaces which have been so historically centered around white people. And classic narratives are so common in Cambridge Theatre as well that it's difficult to feel like you can go and audition for a Shakespeare or a show that has a family, because you know that most of the people who audition are going to be white, and then that family will be white.
Yeah.
So people don't really feel like there's a place for them. So it's a struggle for actors in that way, and then for directors, there's a great struggle in then trying to find those actors. It takes a lot of man hours to cast a BME production. When I was trying to get people to audition for Fences, I went to the Freshers' Fair and I flyered every single black person I saw, every single one. And I had everybody on the crew doing on like a rota of going to the Freshers' Fair and just accosting people, because sometimes you have to shove yourself in somebody's face and say, here's an opportunity for you. If you want to take it, absolutely take it. And then once that all happens, there's a massive pressure to like put on a good show, because you then need to show that it is possible for BME people to take up these spaces and do it well, that it's not just a space for white people who are so often seen as a blank canvas, that a director can project any character that they want onto. Also, white directors in casting BME actors tend to have their own internal bias. If they're casting a classical play, they've probably got an image in their mind of what they want for that character, and that image will so often not be a BME person, an ethnic minority, which ethnic minorities tend to know about. Like they'll know that this is going to be the case, and it just makes it so much harder for people to get involved. And this just creates this circular problem where people don't feel like they can get involved, they don't get involved, they're not represented, more people feel like they can't get involved, so it just carries on going.
Yeah, so it seems there's kind of like a systemic problem in terms of representation.
Yeah.
And how do you think this ties into the wider industry in the West?
I think there's the same problem of representation. Like in some ways, Cambridge is a microcosm for the film and theatre industry as a whole in the West. But in many other ways, Cambridge's problems are so much more easily fixed. Like there are already being solutions implemented as of kind of end of last year, beginning of this year, where people have audition slots that are just for BME people, just for LGBT people, just for trans and non-binary people, which goes a really long way in solving that problem. But in the real industry, it's a lot more complex. I got some statistics from a very similar panel that I went to at the Watersprite Festival. A fantastic woman called Melanie Hoyes told us that in a kind of canvas of thousands of movies, she works for the BFI, they found that 40% of them had named black actors, but if the movie was a crime genre movie, then 60% of them would have named black actors. And it just goes to show that like there's not only a problem of representation in the industry, there's a problem of how people are represented and how often they are misrepresented by the industry. And often if you have a movie where the people are predominantly black or gay, then that story will also be about their blackness or their queerness or something like that, which that kind of just ensures that these stereotypes will continue being promoted, and that also has the same problem of Cambridge in that it stops people from getting involved in the first place. Getting involved in the theatre industry still remains very much a rich kids club. Auditioning for drama schools is extremely expensive. And if you can't audition for drama schools and you want to find an agent, but to find an agent you need to be in productions, which you can't do unless you are at university or you are at like a prestigious theatre course. So it's hard for people to get involved in that as well. Furthermore, a big solution to the increase in representation is simply cutting white work and giving those spaces to BME people. But cutting work for white people in the industry is something that is near impossible. Most people who work in the industry are freelancers, and that means that they are like slow to change because they know that if they change, then their own work is going to be cut. So it's just massively more complex. I think Cambridge has taken some very good steps into fixing the issues, but the industry itself the stakes are a lot higher, and people are far less willing to let go of certain things like money.
Okay, thanks, Saskia. So my next set of questions are directed to the panel as a whole. This question actually ties into what you're talking about, stereotypes. So art in general is said to be reflective of society and of people, but when it comes to characters from ethnic minorities, so whether that's in film or theatre or even literature, a lot of those characters often play up to certain stereotypes, so whether that's being very violent or aggressive or just being exotic, glamorous, eye candy at times. There is often the sense that people from ethnic backgrounds just fit into a certain narrow mold. What impact do you think this has on art, and how do you think it affects an audience who's watching this? So whether that's people from that ethnic background who are watching it who don't really identify with the character, or whether that's people who are white and who are watching it and who don't really know enough about the culture but think there might be some sort of problem. So it's for the panel as a whole, so if anyone wants to jump in.
Yeah, it's a difficult one because a lot of the people writing drama and films are still white, and they still tend to see the world in that very monocultural way. And when an Asian or black character comes, they see it in kind of contrast or some sort of maybe not necessarily oppositional, but it's always a kind of contrasting figure, or it's a marginal figure, or somebody who's just a bit of a sidekick and not a main character. And that, of course, has an impact on the audience in the sense that we tend to marginalise ourselves because we see ourselves as marginal, and then we don't find a place within the larger framework. When saying we are part of the mainstream, all the people producing drama and stuff need to recognise that. And until they do, then the audience, also the white people, unconsciously or consciously, are absorbing the same thing, the same messages.
I think that you're completely right. I think one of the biggest issues from just like anecdotal evidence and my own personal experience is that if you are a minority and you see yourself as marginalized, then you marginalize yourself. I did the exact same thing as you when I was a kid. I used to write like whole books and I wrote short stories and stuff. Every single character was white. And I had to reread one of these stories, and it was like 60,000 words. Not one character, dozens of characters, not one of them was an ethnic minority. And I had to reread and edit it because the website that I'd posted on when I was a kid wanted to like do some stuff with it. So like
you did that quite without really thinking.
Yeah, absolutely subconsciously. Which honestly baffles me. And I went through and I changed the race of every single character. But I think that it's such a subconscious thing. It really, you internalize these things so deeply. And I think that is one of the biggest problems, that the marginalization of characters, of people, of figures in art, in journalism, in TV and film, is that it really has this deep set effect on regular people's lives.
I mean, if we had an equal playing field, that would be perfectly okay, I think, for you to write a play which had white characters. But clearly, when there's a need for us to represent ourselves, we also have a responsibility, I think, as creators, to put ourselves at the center of it, you know, and to justify it if we're made to say, no, this is a character and we cannot change the ethnicity, because whether there's much ethnic input to it or not, the fact is you've got a brown or a black person playing a lead part, and that makes an important statement subconsciously. And then other people think, well, yeah, it can be done. And people who want to write more about culture and ethnicity then feel that they have to, you know, somebody is listening, somebody is representing them and will give them a platform or a voice.
Yeah, I think like the question of agency is really important. I think like representation, like visibility, like that's just kind of one step, and like the next step is authorship, so like who's actually writing these stories. And yeah, I think it's really powerful for you to say, you know, like our narratives are worthy of being like shown and being told. Yeah.
And so in terms of
Sorry.
agency, carry on.
No, I think it's important for white writers also to be inclusive and to have part. And those who are in a position where they can, you know, they're powerful enough to say, no, I want a black character or I want an Asian character. And again, it doesn't matter too much, you know, the cultural input or, you know, we don't get, I think the authenticity is another debate we can have about that. But the symbolic act of having a black lead or a Asian lead is powerful in itself, I think. And it's important that we tell people, especially people who are writing about London. I mean, it's just crazy to have an all-white cast when like at least one in four people in London is from an ethnic minority background. So there's no excuse, really, in my opinion.
So in terms of agency, recently we've had films like Black Panther, and then we have A Wrinkle in Time coming out as well. And these are films where they have black characters or characters from ethnic backgrounds playing the leads, but they also have people from these backgrounds directing and producing. So you have diversity in all aspects of the spectrum, which are really instrumental, I would think, in breaking down barriers. What do you think needs to be done in your different industries or in your different areas of study to implement change effectively and to implement it faster? So for this, because you come from different backgrounds, maybe we could start from Toby and then we can move this way.
So in journalism, I think diversity schemes do work, or I think diversity schemes are the way to start, just because I think, as I said, 94% of journalism is white. I think we need to be active, proactive, and being like, okay, we need a set amount of people of colour in these publications. Yeah. It's not necessarily the best way, but it's the best starting point. And I think there should actually be consequences at this point in time now if you don't have a set of a certain quota of ethnic minorities or alternative or marginalised voices within your publications. Because what I think the problem is that money moves the needle, not morals. We see that, for me anyways, race is a great topic at the moment because we've seen the rise of marginalised platforms like Galdam, who are cultivating these online communities, these thousands of people. And now people call me up and be like, oh, okay, we'd love to have your writing because you have that social platform. So I think if there was a consequence, especially with money, that you didn't include a set quota, I think people would include them. I really do. I don't think it's and maybe it's just the pessimist in me in my industry. I don't think people feel morally obliged to give someone a chance because they're from a different voice. There are some people in the industry that do and are allies, but I think if you had like the consequences of if you don't have a set quota, there's a financial implication. I think there will be a huge change in the landscape.
Yeah, I mean, money talks, so I think that would definitely be something that would incentivize people to do something, at least in the short term, and then in the long
Yeah,
term.
I think it's important to say, to have these kind of schemes where you can appeal and get ethnic minorities in the bottom ladder, or whatever you want to call it. But there is also, just looking the other way, there is a cultural factor which another, you know, a lot of our parents are not terribly keen on their children doing journalism or art or theatre, because it's a very unstable world. I mean, okay, if you work for a paper, that's slightly different, or a magazine, but if you're going in and you're trying to write freelance, it's a very precarious existence, and they are not comfortable with that. And therefore, that also there is a bit of an inhibition there with a lot of young people, I find, who find it very reluctant to, they really want to be creative, they want to write, or they want to act. And then the culture, the family are telling them, no, you get a job, you be a lawyer, or you work in the city, you know, you earn money, and then maybe somewhere down the line. But of course, we all know that doing it half-heartedly is not really going to work, and you have to be passionate about it. But at the end of the day, it's only the really kind of determined people who really want it are going for it, and that's not like that for most people. You know, they have a wide choice, and we should have the wide choice.
Definitely. Yeah. And do you think there's anything that can be done at Cambridge, so I suppose in terms of attracting more applicants from certain backgrounds to perhaps study English or history, because I think these are subjects where traditionally you don't have that many students from ethnic backgrounds, or even HSPS sometimes. So do you think there's something that the university can do? I know that we're doing a lot in terms of access work, but do you think that we can do more work, or that it needs to be led by certain faculties?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, like the disparity in terms of like the ethnic minority breakup within subjects, because English is quite like a very white subject, I would say. So I think, just having that, creating platforms for dialogue, and like encouraging, because I think a lot of access work is being done in terms of like ethnic minorities, state school students, to apply to Cambridge in general. But I think there should be like faculty-specific programs as well, because I think there is a disparity. Yeah.
And Saskia, do you have anything to... I know you talked about theatre earlier, but...
Yeah, I mean, I think I was just thinking about what you were saying about quotas. And while Cambridge Theatre doesn't have quotas, it does have much more stringent rules, at least the ADC does, about including ethnic minorities. And the one that comes to mind is that if there is an ethnic minority in your show, you can't whitewash them. And if you do, then you have to provide evidence to the ADC that you have done absolutely everything in your ability. You've taken every single step that you can to try and find a non-white person. And if you can't provide that evidence, then you're just not allowed to put on the show. So I think that it's nice to see that, like, because the ADC is also like a business, it's not just a society. So it's nice to see that, like, at that level in the university, that are things happening.
Is that working?
Seems to be.
Okay,
As far as I can tell, people, like the student body just seems to care more, and I think the rules that have been implemented have been a result of the student body starting to care more. And then when that becomes official, then it starts to kind of spreads, the idea spreads. For example, as well, the ADC main theatre is closed next term. So Pembroke Players is opening up Pembroke New Cellars for half a season. And they're only looking for student-written plays, or plays that are focused around BME and LGBT characters, because it's become such a strong dialogue. So it seems like things are improving, and I think I'm slightly worried about the tendency for universities to have like a short-term memory. Like once
Yeah.
the people who kind of initiated this leave, like will it fizzle out? But I feel like if it doesn't, if it continues to build and rules like this go into the constitutions of the big theatre societies that fund all of these shows, then we could have a much better situation a few years down the line. Yeah.
So I suppose you need to ensure there's short-term change, but also that there's continuity. And in speaking of continuity and long-term measures, so at the Oscars, Frances McDormand talked about the need for inclusion riders. So that's where you ensure that there's diversity in terms of the cast and the crew. But I was thinking that potentially a problem could be that certain actors or actresses from particular backgrounds might feel that they don't have enough bargaining power to request for an inclusion rider, or they might think if they're asking like a big shot producer, I'm not going to take part in your drama unless you ensure there's diversity. They might be afraid that that producer then tells them, okay, well then we'll just have someone else. So do you think that asking for inclusion riders would be a sufficient step, or that there's a need for further steps, such as maybe legislation, or I don't really know much about the film industry, but maybe like the authority in charge saying that certain steps have to be taken. So I was wondering if you had any views on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a start. Otherwise, if we just leave things as they are, we'll be in the same... I mean, some of these debates I was having in my university, you know, about the canon and all that. And here we are 20 years and you're talking about the same thing. So I don't want to be in a position in 10 years' time still on this kind of platform talking about diversity in this way. I want it to be, you know, just part of every day. It's not a thing, but we have to start somewhere, and having inclusion riders is an important, you know, to get a more inclusive thing. Change has to start, and people at the top really need to do something and respond to I think, the groundswell. Otherwise, they're going to lose a generation quite easily.
And do you think legislation would be a good idea, or would that be a step too far, do you think? Do you think there's a role for the government to step in and say, we think there's a problem, so we're going to address it?
Yeah, I mean, the government, it's not... Some industries like the BFI have, when they're doing lottery funding, they have now a diversity kind of charter, which the filmmakers, the producers, they want that access to that money. They have to qualify on terms of diversity, you know, number of women, ethnic minorities, and that you will see change, and it's beginning to change, because when you're tying money into it, then you invariably get change. That's the way I see it. If it's just government doing it, unless they legislate, which is a big step, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's better to come from within the industry, and the people at the top of the industry recognise that and know they have to do something. There are a lot of other problems that the government has to deal with, and I'm not saying this is, you know, right at the top of in that kind of way. But if the people in the positions of power within an industry recognise the issue, that's a start, and they want to do something about it with a kind of rider, then we are going to make some progress. That's my own feeling, and we don't need politicians to legislate necessarily. That's my own opinion.
And I think the thing is, people at the top of the film industry, I'm not in the film industry, it requires them to give up their privilege. And that's the biggest problem about making any of the industries that we're in, whether it be from academia to film and theatre to journalism. The problem is that people are not prepared to give up their privilege. And that's the question of how do you get people to say, you know what, let me pass the mic, let me give this to someone else. And that's the hugest problem, the biggest problem in my opinion. And I think, I agree, I don't know if we need to go straight to government right now at this point, but there needs to be something that forces people to say, you know what, this is not my story to tell. How different would Black Panther have been if the director wasn't a black man?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? How different would it have been if two black men didn't write the script? Would we have had black women that look more like me with natural hair because people understand that this was a nation that wasn't colonized? Would we have had that? I don't think we would. If you see Wrinkle in Time, there's a specific storyline that goes with this biracial girl that follows it all the way through. If you weren't a black woman, I don't think you would have been able to pinpoint that storyline and done it as well. So yeah, that's the biggest thing for me, is it's making people be prepared to give up their privilege for the bigger cause.
Yeah.
And the truth is, humans are inherently selfish, and that's just the truth of it.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
I agree with everything that you just said. I think it's so important to get people in the industry to recognize, like, to recognize their privilege, and to sometimes just like let a bit of it go, because just letting a bit of privilege go is what got us Black Panther.
Yes.
And I think that government legislation, I don't think it would ever pass personally, because if you look at things like government policies that have tried to improve the quality of education, specifically for ethnic minority students, the amount of backlash that gets in the most popular national newspapers is ridiculous. Like newspapers that claim that working class white kids are the real victims of bad education, when really they're using statistics that have been twisted in order to fit their own rhetoric. And that pressure from the media that goes across every vaguely right-wing paper has an effect on whether or not the government actually is going to pass anything. I just don't think it would work. I think that it's not worth spending the time on trying to get the government to implement something when we should be spending time getting the industry to recognize itself and allow more people into their space.
Yeah, and I think if these respective industries, if they are making the claims that, we're creating this amazing content, like, you can't make those claims when you have such a narrow pool of people. I think just recognizing that value is brought through diversity.
Can I just pick up on the point of politics? The politicians themselves, the parties have done some things to improve their own ethnic makeup, and they have made progress. There are more ethnic minority people in Parliament because the parties took it seriously. I mean, it's not where it should be, but it's on a road. And yeah, I agree, I would be sceptical too, but if they can do it in their own house, some people, I think, would say, look, you need to look outside as well. And what you've done inside the house, it's a start. And now, I am sure there are MPs who understand that and get that, because it's certainly improved. I used to cover politics when I was on Eastern Eye and stuff, and there was a small number, and now there's a reasonable number. It's not representative still, but it's a huge improvement from 20 years ago.
I was just wondering if anyone from the audience had any questions they would like to ask our panelists. Yes. There's a mic. Yeah.
Hi. So I was just wondering, a lot of the time when it comes to, say, acting in plays or even writing journalism, a lot of the advice I've received personally is like, maybe don't write about racial issues because you'll be pigeonholed, or say, for example, like with Fences, how do you get away from that whole, like, you're here because you're BME, or your work has been published because you're BME? Because, with the quotas and stuff, as much as I think that's needed, how do we then move away from people discrediting you and saying you're only there because of your colour?
Personally, for me, I feel like it's been a different situation. I feel like you could probably answer this question better, because with like Fences in Cambridge, I feel like that's still something that people recognise that needed to be put on. Like, they needed to see that it needed to happen in an official, Cambridge theatre space and be taken seriously, because that's something that we've been so desperately lacking for such a long time. But I feel like in the wider industry, people are so much more skeptical of what they need to see. So I feel like, I don't know if you...
I think for me as a journalist, I think those with lived experiences are the best people to tell those stories. We need we need Black and Asian people to tell their own stories. That's one thing. So for me, when people ask me, do you want to write on this issue? It might be a race issue. I'm actually happy to write on it. I am. Because I feel self-assured that there's a lack of misrepresentation there. In terms of the discrediting, that is a hard one, and how do we get away from that? I think your work has to speak for itself. I think it does. I think you can get a balance of writing what you want to write in terms of race, but other issues. If someone's not going to give you the platform, the internet has even the playing field. Make your own blog, make your own platform where you're writing about these issues, and then eventually people will pick it up. I do think that. So if you're not allowed to write about, I don't know, if you're a journalist and you want to write about, I don't know, food, and people don't want you to write about food, make a food blog. Do you know what I mean? So if anyone does say anything to you, you can say, well, I have this talent, I have this passion, I'm good at it, it's there. The reason I'm not allowed to write about it is because of the gatekeepers. So that's my advice on that subject.
I think the online space can subvert that. I mean, it's not perfect, but people have, through social media, an opportunity to get their message out, to write about things they're passionate about, and to gather an audience. And it's not easy, but it can be done. And part of the thing, what slightly upsets me in some ways, is that my generation did grow up with a lot more diversity around them. And we shouldn't be in this position now, 20 years after I've, been to university. And we're having the same kind of debate I was having in college myself. And I would have thought by now, at least the people that I've been to university with, who are here and looking after the curriculum or whatever, would be more open to the idea of diversity and not keeping to this kind of narrow curriculum or canon, which is just a white European males, basically. So I'm a little bit, quite disappointed that we haven't made more progress in the time that I was having these debates when I was back at college.
There any other questions? So I have another question for the panelists, which is if you could give our audience any one piece of advice, or two, what would it be? I know it's quite difficult to pick something, but maybe just a couple of things that you found helpful in overcoming challenges.
Well, don't be afraid of failure. I mean, just do it, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But if it does work, it will change your life, and that's the difference. So I would say, you're really passionate about something, just do it, and it doesn't matter what other people are saying, even if they're negative. If you really want to do it, you just do it, and I hope it will work out.
Do you mean advice in terms of diversity or just general?
Well, I suppose with diversity as a focus, but if there's a general piece of advice, that would be fine as well.
In terms of diversity, I would say understand when you need to speak and when you need to listen. I remember I was on a panel once and someone asked me about colorism. And there was a white woman and she spoke over me and explained colorism. And that's a perfect example of understanding when you don't need to speak. I think what would have been great for her is if, the white woman in the audience that asked me the question, if she was shouting me down, that would have been her place to then jump in and said, you know what, as a fellow white woman, you need to listen because this is a lived experience that she understands. So I think, and I want to say everybody has privilege. I know as an able-bodied black woman, I have a lot of privilege compared to someone with disability. So for me, I wouldn't write a story on disability to personally take from someone's pay pocket, but the platform of Black Ballad will pay someone who's a black disabled woman to have her voice heard. So understand that you all have privilege and understand when to use it and when not to use it.
I would say just have confidence in your own narratives and don't wait for kind of external validation of those, and have the courage to pursue them.
I would say two things. Encourage your peers especially those who are minorities, if they are disabled, if they're LGBT, or if they're BME, if they want to do something, but they're kind of like umming and ahhing about it, like give them every bit of encouragement, because it's those voices of encouragement that help minorities like actually go forward and just do it. And second piece of advice, ask college for money. Because if you want to do a project or something and you don't have the money for it, which is it holds so many people back, your colleges are all loaded. Ask them for money.
That's very good advice. And my final question is, could you each share someone whose work has inspired you? Someone from any artistic background? Or more than one person, if it's difficult to pick.
Well, I mean, I was writing about this on International Women's Day. Alice Walker is somebody that I admire, and the work that she's done. She's one person who's kind of given a voice to people who didn't really have a voice. And that's, I think for me, that's always very inspiring. So when you're on the spot.
Alice Walker's my favourite author, actually, so I'm just thinking. Someone who's close to home is a journalist called Bim Adewumi. Started writing from the journalist, started a blog called Yoruba Girl Dancing. And she was the culture editor of BuzzFeed, the first person that took a freelance chance on me, actually, and the piece that she commissioned changed my journalism career. I think sometimes, especially if you're ethnic minority, and sometimes even if you're a woman, there's this idea that you can be the only one. And the fact that she was able to commission me and give me advice as a journalist really helped me as a writer, and I hope as an editor, in terms of how I can go back to my writers and say, look, this is what you need to do. So Bim Adewumi is someone that I admire a lot. And apart from that, I suppose like an obvious one is Oprah, because Oprah's Oprah. So yeah, I could say that, and then I could surprise everyone else, and then just say Beyonce. Yeah, because I think people underestimate the path that she's forged for herself, being like the first African-American woman to win a prestigious songwriting prize, changing how R&B music was sung in the late 90s, and I think producing an album like Lemonade when she was at the height of her career, could have been detrimental. People could have, there was a lot of backlash to it, in, some people being like, why are you talking about black womanhood and but she went for her album, and I think Lemonade was really empowering for a certain demographic, and she opened up conversations that I think a mainstream audience probably wouldn't have had or wouldn't have listened to if, an academic like Bell Hooks was there. And I think she's made black feminism through Lemonade more accessible and more human, and I think that sometimes you need to credit those people. So yeah, Beehive all the way.
I would say Zora Neale Hurston. I'm writing my dissertation on her right now. I just love the way that she's not afraid to make marginal voices central. Yeah.
I would say Viola Davis. She's amazing. She's just amazing. And she worked incredibly hard. And she's amazing. I have so many. John Boyega, who, paid his own way through part-time acting school. And he has also just done incredibly well for himself. And he brought his whole family to this premiere, and it was so cute. And every black woman in Black Panther, because they are so empowering. I watch it and it just gives me shivers, especially Letitia Wright, who plays Shuri, and she's incredible. And I think that all of these people do a lot to to counter the tokenistic representation that we were talking about earlier.
Oh, and Chimamanda Adichie. You have
Huh?
to say Chimamanda Adichie.
Yes, yeah.
You
Chimamanda.
have to say her.
Yeah.
Okay, well, with that, I just want to say a really big thank you to all four of our panelists for speaking to us this evening. And I think we would all agree that diversity in the arts is a really important issue, and it's something that we need to keep talking about, keep pressing for change. So thank you for being part of the discussion, and thank you to the audience as well for being here. I hope everyone has a great evening, and I hope that this conversation is something that continues to happen both within the union and outside. So thank you. Thank you.